For the most of us, the story of AirAsia and its rise and growth over the past few decades has been part of the aviation industry lore. More specifically, the story of how Tony Fernandes and the Toon Group purchased an airline which was very much written off for just one ringgit. Since then, the AirAsia Group has expanded to become the premier low-cost airline group in the entire region, with its aggressive marketing and innovative approaches to handling the business of aviation. However, what's not often told is the story of AirAsia before this now famous purchase, as there isn't really that much material easily available to learn about this part of the history of AirAsia. So while this is part of the closed series, the title for this video will likely be AirAsia in the era before Tony Fernandes. While the most successful part of AirAsia's history can be traced to the one ringgit sale in 2001, the original start of the AirAsia as an airline was in 1993. This initiative was started by a Malaysian-backed conglomerate HiCom, which is now known as DRB HiCom. Far from being a low-cost airline, the vision for the airline would be a premium airline that would be able to compete against the Malaysian flag carrier Malaysia Airlines. Hence, it would be a premier Malaysian airline with the intent to serve the increasing numbers of visitors to Malaysia, including those from the neighboring ASEAN states. However, it wouldn't be until a few years later when the airline would finally take its first flight. For the initial fleet, it started with two Boeing 737-300 aircraft, and the initial hub for the airline would be at the former Kuala Lumpur airport at Subang. The airline's first flight would be on November 15, 1996, from Subang to Utapao in Thailand. In contrast to the current red and white livery that we all are familiar today, back then AirAsia sported blue and green colors with the eagle on the tail of the aircraft. While the Boeing 737 could seat 145 passengers, AirAsia's seat configuration for the 737s had 132 seats, which would give some room for travelers, but also the aircraft would feature a first class which was called Perdana class. Passengers would also be served premium food and beverage selection. This service would also be offered on flights less than 2 hours, with an example being a flight from Kuala Lumpur to Kuching. To get an idea of what you could have been served, there's actually a menu card on the AirAsia Museum website which actually describes a 3-course menu with a choice of chicken with vegetables, baked fish with herbs, or stir-fried beef oyster. Eventually, the airline would open up more flights and its network would be expanded to other cities in Malaysia such as Kuching, Kota Kinabalu, and Langkawi. Beyond Malaysia, AirAsia had bigger plans to expand and take this premium brand of airline service beyond its current offerings and network. I really couldn't find that much information on the route network, but according to a post on a aviation enthusiast website, MalaysianWings.com, it did state that the airline did operate flights to Taipei and also had charter flights to Subic Bay in the Philippines. Another opportunity for overseas flights that AirAsia then saw was the opportunity to serve Hajj pilgrimage flights. As part of these efforts, the airline would lease 3 Boeing 747-200s and a McDonnell Douglas DC-11. However, like many of its counterparts, it would take a major hit following the Asian financial crisis in 1997. Hit hard, the airline shifted its focus from expanding to overseas to operations within its domestic network. However, it never fully recovered, and by the early 2000s, before the Toon Group took over, AirAsia had a debt of around $11 billion, and for the most part was a money-losing venture. Observers basically written off the airline as unsavable. From its near demise, the now famous 1 ringgit purchase in 2001 by Tony Fernandes and the Toon Group would see the shift of the airline becoming a low-cost airline, which we now are familiar today. This part of AirAsia's history is of another era, between 1993 and 2001 under different management. From the information I acquired, the AirAsia of the 1990s was a product of its generation as deregulation of the aviation industry was becoming more common around the world, and really it was just starting in Southeast Asia during the 1990s. Hence, it was the start of the competition between newcomers like AirAsia at the time and the likes of the legacy carriers like Malaysia Airlines. I do believe these were some of the factors that led into the mistakes that the former AirAsia made, particularly trying to offer a premium product while at the same time competing with Malaysia Airlines in terms of airfares. Another factor could have been the leasing of the large Boeing 747s and the MD-11, which were used mostly for the Hajj flights, and the costs of keeping them on the ground and maintained in between the Hajj seasons likely added up for the airline. Also, it is highly questionable to have those large aircraft for a young fledgling airline whose network was primarily within Malaysia itself. While there were factors that led it to its near demise, the legacy of the old era of AirAsia proved to be a foundation for what would be the AirAsia Group that we know today. The 737 jets would eventually be the first to be used in the operations of the rebooted airline as a budget carrier. And the Boeing 737 would be the initial aircraft used to help jumpstart the subsidiaries of Indonesia AirAsia and Thai AirAsia before the Airbus A320 became the primary workhorse of the airline group fleet. Nowadays, it's hard to imagine that AirAsia once had a livery with blue and green, plus having the Boeing 737 as its primary workhorse. This likely is an era that may be remembered by more of the older generation of Malaysian aviation enthusiasts, so if you have some interesting stories or more information I didn't mention, feel free to put them in the comment section below. In the meantime, I definitely hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. This has been Flights in Asia, highlighting the news and updates in the aviation and travel scene in the Asia Pacific. Thanks again for watching and have a great day.